Another slideshow this morning. The slideshows are on Buddhist images and symbols, and this particular slideshow today is leading up to Buddha Day. So the Great Buddha Day Festival is going to be happening next Sunday. We'll be having events throughout the day, so look out for that on the newsletter and on the website and on thebuddhistcenter.com. And Buddha Day is the anniversary of the Buddha's enlightenment, so it's the anniversary of the very beginning of Buddhism. And the Buddha is a key figure in Buddhism. You can see here is my shrine with a Buddha on it. And it's actually also got, so he's flanked by the Buddha's mother and by Kuan Yin, who's the Bodhisattva of compassion. And that's a Burmese Buddha there on the shrine. And a figure that you'll see later on in the slideshow above, behind the mirror, which is Manjughosha, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. So because we're concentrating on the Buddha himself, I thought it would be good to have a slideshow called Meeting the Buddhas with an S, because there isn't just one Buddha. So I'm going to share with you some images in a minute, and that'll last for about 40 minutes or so. And then at the end, there will be some space for some chat. If anybody's looking at this on YouTube Live, then you will be able to join the Zoom meeting at the end if you want to ask some questions, or you can put them in the chat on YouTube Live if you're watching on YouTube Live. I don't promise we'll get back to them very quickly, but we'll see how that goes. So let's move over now to some interesting images of Buddhas. I'm hoping that you can see that. So for me, the first thing that strikes me about looking at the Buddha, and that includes the one that I showed you on my own shrine a couple of minutes ago, is just the beauty of the images, the beauty of the statues. My father gave me the statue on the shrine. He was walking down Portobello Road and he was really struck by a Burmese bronze Buddha, the serenity of the face, the calmness of the face, the sense of aliveness and kindness as well in the face. So what a Buddha image, what a Buddha face is trying to do is to reflect the best human qualities. It's trying to reflect what it is like to be an awake, a fully awake, alive and compassionate human being. It's quite an ask for an artist to do that, of course. This particular one that I hope you can see now is from Borobudur, which is a great Buddhist temple come stupa in Java in Indonesia. And this is probably about 800 or more years old. And this particular one's actually in the British Museum. So why do we have these images? Well, the Buddha is, of course, the founder of Buddhism. And any founder is always respected and revered. There's a lot of gratitude to the founder. So in a way, it's not surprising that Buddhist temples and so on might have images of the founder. If it was in modern times, they'd have a photograph up or somebody would do a nice painting. But the Buddha isn't just the person who founded Buddhism. The Buddha also represents something. And the Buddha represents the possibility of awakening, which is in everybody. It's not just some people that have that possibility. Everybody has it. Everybody can move from where they are now into more open states of mind, more wise states of mind, more realistic states of mind, more compassionate, and away from those states of mind which are inward-looking and tight, are self-oriented, are fearful and anxious, and so on. And so that's the movement. That movement is a movement towards awakening, and there's no limit to that movement according to Buddhist tradition. So the Buddha is the possibility of awakening, and he also represents the awakening that's inherent in all of us. So when you look at a Buddha face, you could imagine you're looking at your own face, or even superimpose your own face on the Buddha and say, well, where is that enlightenment? Where is that awakening? inside me. So what I'd like to do is go a bit historical and ask how Buddhists traditionally see the Buddha, and also why other Buddhas. There was only one person who originally founded Buddhism, one historical person. So why do we have so many different Buddhas in Buddhism? And why do we have so many sort of mythical figures in Buddhism? So here's a very early image from the early days of Buddhism. You see the elephants, you see men with swords, with distorted faces and so on. You see a tree, and you can see a chair, a nice chair with clawed feet and a little footstool and some cushions on it. So what is going on here? And it seems that in early Buddhism, the Buddha was usually shown by symbols and not by any attempt to depict the Buddha himself. There's a bit of argument about this because there's no real historical information as to why these early images don't include the Buddha himself. So what we can see here is his chair, his cushion, and we can see the Bodhi tree under which he's said to have gained enlightenment. And it shows the attack of the hordes of Mara, all the doubts, the negative emotions that he had to get through in order to gain awakening, to gain enlightenment. And here's another image of the Bodhi tree and the chair or the seat under it, the garlands of pearls in the tree, and people worshipping the tree. So some people say, some art historians will say, oh, well, here the tree represents the Buddha or the seat represents the Buddha. Others will say, well, the Bodhi tree itself was revered in early Buddhism. It was a place of pilgrimage. People would go there to see where the Buddha had gained enlightenment. And maybe these people are simply paying homage to the Bodhi tree itself. So tree worship, nature worship. Nature is very, very important in Buddhism, a love for nature and a feeling for the tree as almost representing the growth of the human spirit from deep roots, well-grounded, reaching into the sky and welcoming the sunshine. But it may be that there's some other reason why the Buddha wasn't shown. It may be that people felt they couldn't depict enlightenment. And you do have quotes like this from the Diamond Sutra, which is ascribed to the Buddha. Those who by my form did see me, and those who followed me by voice, wronged the efforts they engaged in. Me those people will not see. From the Dharma one should see the Buddhas. From the Dharma bodies comes their guidance. Yet Dharma's true nature cannot be discerned, and no one can be conscious of it as an object. So hence we have other ways of showing the Buddha. If you want to have some art, if you want to have a reminder of the Buddha or something in your temple, you want something there, I guess. And so we've seen the tree and the chair, and here we see the Buddha's footprint, which represents the Buddha when he's on tour, when he's walking around, as he did for his whole life, giving talks on Buddhism and introducing Buddhism. And we can also see in the center of the footprint, there's the Dharma wheel, the wheel of truth. And that itself becomes an emblem of the Buddha in his role as a teacher. So here we can see the Dharma wheel hung with garlands and strings of pearls again, with attendants on either side of it, being revered as a wheel, the wheel of truth, the wheel of reality, if you like, being shown here very early, 2nd century BCE. But after a while, the Buddha himself does start to appear in Buddhist art. And in the slideshow last week, I said the first known image was on a coin, but actually this is an even earlier one. This is the very earliest dated image of the Buddha, and it's about 30 to 10 BCE, the Bimaran casket, from the Gandhara region of what is modern Pakistan, made in gold. And we'll also see a coin with the Buddha's name in Greek on it, Bodho, from the Kushan Empire, which is also one of the succeeding kingdoms to Alexander the Great's Indo-Greek kingdoms on the northern boundaries of India. And so here they preserved the Greek techniques, the Greek ways of representing people, and also the confidence that it is possible to represent something wonderful in art. And so the Gandharan sculptors started to experiment with depicting the Buddha. So here's quite an early one, the Buddha meditating above, supported by lions, and the Buddha greeting somebody and touching his feet below. And with the Buddha, you'll see Vajrapani, the thunderbolt holder, who is in the form of Heracles or Hercules. And here, very, very familiar Buddha form starts in Gandhara around 2,000 years ago. We start to see the Buddha seated, serene in meditation, with an aura of light around his head, the light of awareness or the light of enlightenment, and his hands folded in his lap. And this attempt to produce a serenity, not just in the face, but also in the whole posture of the Buddha. And once again, lions depicted on the throne, the lions representing the lion's roar, the one in the jungle who everybody stops to listen to when his voice is heard. Sometimes the Buddha would be shown standing or walking, holding his robe, the robe in very, very Greek style, I'm sure you'll agree, even the face in quite a Greek style, but we start to get other features of the Buddha image, the long earlobes, signifying royalty, because royalty or the upper classes in ancient India were the only ones who could afford heavy earrings. And with the bump on the top of the head, which is a bit mysterious, the origin of that, but it seems to originate in a hairstyle with a top knot. And also standing on a lotus to show the fact that, like the lotus blossom separates itself from the mud and the water, though its roots still go down there, the Buddha is also, in a way, aloof from the concerns of the world. And here's another one of the Gandharan figures showing Vajrapani, the thunderbolt holder. He's holding his thunderbolt in his left hand and a torch in his right hand. And he's in the form of the Greek hero Heracles, muscular and protecting the Buddha, symbolically speaking. And the Buddha in his right hand, I think, is holding a healing fruit. And there's another standing Buddha from Gandhara. So we have this attempt, and I'll show you some more of these Indian images from very early Buddhism of the Buddha. We have this attempt to depict the Buddha, to depict enlightenment. But how would you depict the Buddha? Given that nothing survives, no photographs, but not even any paintings from the actual time of the Buddha, first of all, you can't be really sure that you're depicting the Buddha. In fact, you can't do a portrait. There are a few descriptions of the Buddha, but you can't do a portrait of him. So what are you actually doing? He died hundreds of years before. I'll just show you some other representations from other schools in India, which are a little bit different in style, but very recognizable. This is from Mathura, the Gupta period. Just a Buddha head, the tight curly hair, the long earlobes. Another one from Mathura, the Buddha in meditation with the gesture of fearlessness in his right hand. And the figures in the sky, I think, are called Ashpashas, heavenly musicians. Another one from the Gupta period. The Gupta period, actually, the art there starts, that should say the 4th to the 5th century. the art there does start about the same time as the Gandharan art, so it's not completely clear it was Greek influence that allowed people to feel they could depict the Buddha. And also from that same Gupta period, from Sarnath, the great stupa at Sarnath. A bit more stylized, aren't they, these ones? But very, very, very beautiful. A different way of showing the face. So we've got this sense of trying to show what enlightenment is like, what it actually is. And you've got a problem here that a historical figure is very specific, particular color of hair and eyes, a height, the marks of their journey through life and so on. But yet, in a way, we are wanting to go away from the historical when we depict enlightenment. We're wanting to go into the imagination so that we can personally relate to enlightenment, so that we can relate to awakening as an extension of the kind of awareness that we ourselves feel. So maybe it would be better to be entirely symbolic, just to show a wheel of truth, or perhaps a tree, or perhaps a chair or a footprint. But somehow that's not satisfying, at least I think not. It seems to me that enlightenment is best depicted by the human form. Historical figures are specific and particular, but if you can go into myth, if you can make the Buddha a mythic figure, then he becomes much more universal and it's more possible to relate to the Buddha as a potential that is within all of us. A historical figure ages, gets old, forgets things, makes mistakes, gets fed up, is restricted to his or her time and place where they live, and meets only a limited number of people, and of course eventually dies. So it's fascinating to look into a life, and to see something of the life of the historical Buddha is very, very inspiring. But there's also this bringing in of this visionary element, this mythic element, an archetype showing the ideal. The historical is valuable for feeling the personal connection with somebody who was, like me, a real human being, and the archetypal is valuable for reaching in to the ideal. And this, I think, is why a lot of Buddhists really do like to go to a Buddhist center where there's a Buddha image as a shrine, and to light candles and incense, and maybe to have something like that at home, to have a picture of the Buddha or the picture of something for them that represents enlightenment. Maybe for some people it will be purely symbolic. It'll be a flower or a Chinese brush painting, or a beautiful stone that they found, or a shell. But for others it's a human figure, the figure of the Buddha or the figure of one of the other mythic Buddhas. And it's been for a long time a very important aspect of Buddhist life, setting up a shrine, having your candles and your flowers and your incense, trying to make something beautiful that you can meditate in front of. And here's an example of a Buddha from a personal shrine. It's very old, so it was quite badly damaged. And it was found in a 10th century grave, but it's actually perhaps at least 200 or 400 years older than that, probably 400 years older than that. Now, the place it was made was the Swat Valley in modern day Afghanistan, which at that time was Buddhist. But where it was found is quite extraordinary. And if you don't know its story, I'm going to tell you the story of this image now. Because I saw it when I was visiting not Afghanistan, not India, not even the British Museum. It's not a result of plunder during the British Empire period. I saw this in a museum in Stockholm, and it was found in the grave of a Viking, a 10th century Viking. So it was clearly one of the treasured possessions of this Viking. It was buried with him when he died. So why and how did this Viking have a Buddha figure with him? Was he a Buddhist? It seems a little bit unlikely. There doesn't seem all that much evidence of the influence of Buddhist values of compassion and non-violence in Viking culture. But nevertheless, it was something that he treasured. And a friend of mine in Sweden, who was familiar with Swedish history and the old Viking sagas, has pieced together a speculative history of this figure. The figure comes from Afghanistan, as I say, And it's known that the Vikings traded at least as far as Iran, which is the next country along. So I think we can imagine that these Swedish Vikings were on their trading links, and when they were in Iran, or maybe even in Afghanistan, they met a Buddhist. And the time of this grave coincides, by the way, with the life of Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava, sometimes known as the second Buddha, who established Buddhism in Tibet. And he was also living in the Swat Valley, the same place where this Buddha was made. And he would have been the most prominent Buddhist there at the time. So the speculation, it's just a nice story, but the speculation would be that this great bearded Viking in his wolfskins met Padmasambhava and was given as a memento a little Buddha image. If I remember rightly, this is about 20 centimeters high. It's not a huge one, small enough to take back in his luggage with his trading goods and back to Sweden. And there it was found in a grave on an island called Helgö, in a Viking grave. And it's even possible that this grave is the grave of a well-known Viking who has a saga. His name was Ingvar the Far-Travelled. He married a Bulgarian princess, and he's known to have lived in Constantinople for a while and then went off to Iran. And his travels became legendary when he got back. So anyway, that's just a little sense of the value of a rupa and how far it can go. So if you have a rupa, which is the name for an image, a Buddha image, then make sure it's revered, make sure it has a place of honor, make sure that you pay some attention to it, because it represents, in a way, your own awakening, a reflection of your own awakening. Even Vikings have Buddha nature. Now I'm going to leave the Indian area now and look in other Buddhist countries at some of the ways that they depicted the Buddha. And in particular, Buddhism, of course, became the dominant religion for many centuries in all the East Asian countries. This is one I showed you the week before last in the Buddhist symbols lecture, a Korean Buddha image that's designed, it seems to me, to be very welcoming, very accessible, very kind and friendly. And then here is an image of the mythic Buddha of the center of the mandala, who I'll say more about later, Vairocana. A massive image. In China, they often make these huge rock-cut images, as they do in other countries as well. And here's a modern representation, an even more massive representation of the Buddha from Hong Kong, made in 1993. In the hills surrounded by the forests. Another giant rock-cut figure in Sichuan province. Here seated in Western style, as Chinese Buddhas very often are, as if on a chair. This is from a book cover for the exhibition I had at the Royal Academy a while ago, of some really superbly beautiful statues of the Buddha from medieval China. And then moving down to Thailand. And over to Japan, another giant Buddha that's really influenced a lot of the Buddha statues that you can get nowadays, this very stable, low center of gravity image. So this is huge, 13.3 meters tall. And it was originally inside a temple. And a tsunami struck Japan in the 15th century, 200 years after the temple was built, and destroyed the temple, but the Rupa, the Buddha statue, survived. And ever since then, it's been in the open air at Kamakura. As you look at these figures, see what they say to you, if anything. The stability, I would say in this case, this very still sense, the stillness that for me represents meditation in general and Zen style meditation in particular. Going back to China, the Tang dynasty is very roughly around the year 1000, and it was a golden age for Buddhism in China, with some superb art and literature emerging during that period. And originally, these figures would have been very brightly painted. And now, back to the same place that the head at the very beginning of the slideshow was from, Borobudur in Java. The great stupa there. I'll talk more about that stupa when I give a slideshow on stupas. But it has hundreds of Buddha statues in it, made of volcanic stone, each one slightly different, but all with the most beautiful, serene faces and a lovely upright posture. In this case, in the gesture of teaching. This would have originally been inside one of these latticework stupas that you can see behind, but the stones from this one have been lost, so you can see the rupa more clearly. Cambodia, a very recognizable Cambodian style, and this is the Muchalinda Buddha, which is our historical Buddha, but it's when he was, according to legend, being sheltered from the rain by the great serpent deity Muchalinda, with his cobra hood with 7 heads. So now I want to go on to looking a little bit more at what it means to have a mythic Buddha, and whether this is just some sort of a degeneration or a superstition, or whether it actually has some value. So this is a quote from the Lotus Sutra, one of the great Mahayana sutras, originating around 2000 years ago. And in this sutra, the Buddha is talking to his followers, and he's disabusing them of a misconception. And in a way, the misconception he's disabusing them of is that the Buddha was just somebody who gained enlightenment and then died. Because what he's saying is that there's another meaning of Buddhahood, and that Buddhahood, in a sense, is something that is not in time, that's outside time. The Buddha is the principle of enlightenment. And there's a particular type of awareness that one can develop that is receptive to that principle of enlightenment, and finds that maybe in the stories and the teachings of the Buddha, but also in art, in depictions of the Buddha. So we need to open ourselves up to what is bigger than ourselves. In a way, that's part of the religious quest, but particularly the Buddhist quest, is to say that my immediate experience of myself, my ego, my personality, my identity, is only a small part of what is accessible to me. So what is beyond that? And what's bigger than that? The big mind, larger than the ego, larger than ourself, beyond the self. And that's where this sense of Buddhahood as a universal principle outside time can be very useful. I like it, at least. So it transcends everything else. It's sort of awakeness itself. It's full awareness without any barriers. And if you have that sense of what is bigger, then that is almost like an ability that you have to sense Buddhahood as a principle. So you look out for that in every experience. And this is the way the Buddha describes it in the Lotus Sutra. Identifying with this principle of Buddhahood, he says, since I attained Buddhahood, everyone thought, oh yes, you attained Buddhahood a few decades ago, when you were a young man. And he says, no, since I attained Buddhahood, the eons through which I have passed are infinite, thousands of myriads of multitudes of uncountable years. ceaselessly preached I, the Dharma, and taught countless billions of creatures to enter the way of the Buddha. And since then, are unmeasured eons. Then I, with all the Sangha, appear together on the divine Vulture's Peak. Vulture's Peak is a real place that was part of the Buddha's historical life, where he taught many of his most important sutras, including, according to tradition, the White Lotus Sutra, or the Lotus Sutra. So I, with all the Sangha, all the followers, appear together on the divine Vulture's Peak. And then I tell creatures that I exist forever in this world. If in other regions there are beings reverent and with faith aspiring, again I'm in their midst to teach the supreme Dharma. So there's a sense of the visionary Buddha who can appear in deep meditation, who can, as if you feel in the presence of the Buddha, if you have that sort of response to what is bigger than you. You, not hearing of this, only say I die. I see all living creatures sunk in the sea of suffering. Hence I do not reveal myself, but set them all aspiring, till, when their hearts are longing, I appear to teach the Dharma. In such amazing, pervading power, throughout uncountable eons, I'm always on Vulture's Peak, and in every other dwelling place. So he's saying, in a way, that enlightenment is always there, always accessible. It's something you can touch. It's part of your own awareness that you can touch. But he also says, why in that case did the Buddha, the historical Buddha, live and then die? And he says, well, in a way, it was necessary. It was necessary for the Buddha to die, because that sets people's hearts longing. It meant that people need a sort of an urge. They need an aspiration. This is according to the White Lotus Sutra. They need a feeling of something lacking, something being missing. And then they will, or we will, practice hard, visualize the Buddha perhaps, cultivate our own awareness. But if the Buddha was always around in an ordinary sense, we would take him for granted. We'd forget about the magic of enlightenment, the wonder of enlightenment, the rarity in a way of enlightenment. So that's I'm sure that there are many points of view on that, but that's the point of view being taught in the White Lotus Sutra. In much more extensively than this is just a brief quotation from it, but it goes into it in some detail about what you might call the revelation of the eternal Buddha. The Buddha who's always there. So if reality was easily visible without you changing in order to encompass it, then you take it for granted and you would probably just stay as you are. So it wouldn't really be reality you were looking at, it would just be a token of reality. So it's through tokens, it's through the Sambhogakaya that you make your approach. And if those tokens get devalued, then the access is lost. So the Buddha says he appears not to be present so that you long to see him. And then when you do see him, you'll be pleased and you'll take full advantage. And you also see him not in an ordinary way, but in a visionary way, a bright, clear, colourful, non-everyday way. I'll move on to a Thai image of the Buddha while I talk more about this. They love gilding their images in Thailand, making them seem much more imaginative, much more beyond the everyday, but still obviously a human being. And there's the Buddha at the time of his death. A nice shot that shows a close-up of his toes. And we have in South Asia also these beautiful standing Buddhas, also rock cut from Sri Lanka. So how to depict the Buddha in an image? It's an elusive thing. It's a difficult thing to know how to do it, to make sure that the Buddha is both wonderful and also human. And this means that as time developed, Buddhists started to say that the Buddha has more than one body. He doesn't just have the ordinary fleshly body, he also has a visionary body, and he also has a body, as it were, that is reality itself, awakening, representing a complete union with reality and therefore being reality. So you start from maybe the historical Buddha, and then you realize you can't depict him. And then you realize, as in the quote I showed you at the beginning, it's from the Dharma bodies that you really recognize the Buddha. In other words, it's from the truth, reality itself. The Buddha is not a form at all. He's a Dharma body. But then we have the Buddha as a visionary body, the ideal form, and not a Dharma body in that case, but what's called the Sambhoga Kaya, the Sambhoga body, which means the body of mutual delight, the body of communication, the body of feeling in touch with the Buddha as an ideal figure. And we also need to be reminded of the Buddha as a human being, as an ordinary human being. This is known as the Nirmanakaya, which means the constructed body, the body that came about through ordinary and biological and psychological means. So maybe this is why the Buddha is often shown in a massive form. Massive statues, only rivaled really by those of Egypt. And here is another one from Sri Lanka, sort of trying to give you a sense of the visionary Buddha. And another way to do it is to surround the Buddha by symbolism, by other figures, by stories in pictures. Here's an old image of the Buddha from Tibet. So we've seen some traditional ways of depicting the Buddha. So what do you do nowadays? How do you depict the Buddha now? And this is something which is in its very early days, but Western artists are trying to depict the Buddha. And I'll finish by showing you a few of those, and then some other mythic figures associated with Buddhism. This is thought to be the first Western image of the Buddha, made by the great French visionary artist Odilon Redon in 1906, based on Chinese originals. So he's obviously not made the Buddha Western at this stage, but he has made the Buddha part of a Western artistic style. And quite close to home, this is a statue by Chintamani, who lives not far from the Northland Buddhist Center, a Vajrasana retreat center. And here it's a statue of the mythic Buddha of the East, Akshobhya, with the Vajra, the diamond thunderbolt, and the earth touching. And this is a book illustration of the Buddha at the time of the Enlightenment with the Earth Goddess by Aloka. I'll show you a few more by Aloka, who's a very prolific English Buddhist artist. Sorry, it's not a very good picture of this one. This shows him in the basement of the London Buddhist Centre in Bethnal Green while he was working on the triptych down there. So do go and have a look at his triptych. Ask them to open it up for you. It shows the Buddha flanked by bodhisattvas, Mahayana, mythic figures on the Buddha's right, and by his historical Arahant disciples, men and women, on the left. And that's Aloka himself. And then this is another by Aloka, another triptych from the Norwich Buddhist Centre, putting the Buddha in an urban landscape. And if you're good at art history, which I'm not, but if you're good at art history, you'll probably detect Cubist influences there, and no doubt others as well. Still a recognizable Buddha figure, but a different way of doing it, using geometric forms, using bright, colorful spots of paint to depict the light of the aura, using gold leaf as well, and using what probably is a rather European-looking face. But it doesn't have to be European. It could be an Afro-Caribbean face. To try to depict the Buddha as North Indian, I think, is not really sensible. I think the Buddha needs to be someone you can relate to. And so a great diversity of Buddha forms is valuable. But in this case, it's actually Maitreya Buddha that's being depicted with a stupa in his headdress and the sun and the moon. And if you look carefully, you'll see the London skyline. And this is at the West London Buddhist Centre. And still, the traditional ways of painting Buddhas are still in practice. This is a Tibetan, it's actually a Nepalese artist making a thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara, making a Buddha image. And another modern Tibetan style, wrathful figure. And this brings us on to, just in brief, to give you a little hint that you might want to research further, is not just showing the Buddha as representing awakening, but showing the Buddha as representing particular aspects of awakening. And the energy aspect is what is shown in this flaming, dancing, stamping Buddha, Vajrapani, very, very different, of course, from the serene seated Buddhas. But energy is supremely important, the energy that breaks through, that wields the thunderbolt. And I'll give a slideshow later on the thunderbolt itself and what that signifies. So energy is one aspect of enlightenment, also shown in the figure of the Darkini. This is a modern image of the Darkini with the Dharma wheel as her earring. She has a staff, a trident over her shoulders, if you could see it. She's dancing naked. She's flushed. And she's leaping through a garland of skulls, representing everything that she's leaving behind in her dance of joy and energy. And still representing energy, but in a more still sort of way. This is Vajrasattva, also again by Aloka, a beautiful image in the Manchester Buddhist Centre. It shows the nectar streaming from his heart, streaming down over the ground. The nectar of compassion, but also coming from the Vajra in his heart, energy being held in his right hand. And again with energy, with the Vajra, here's Akshobhya, a very old image of Akshobhya with the female Buddha Lochana, and they're embracing each other. Akshobhya, the blue Buddha of the East, who wields the Vajra of energy. And then we move on to wisdom as an aspect of Buddhahood being depicted in Buddhist art. This is a female Buddha whose name means perfect wisdom. And this is from East Java, a great masterpiece, I think. She has the book of wisdom resting on a lotus by her left shoulder, and her hands are in the mudra, the gesture of teaching. There's a close-up of another Buddha image from Java with that teaching mudra. And similarly, this is Varochana Buddha, also with the teaching mudra representing wisdom. The Buddha, the white Buddha of the center of the mandala. Associated with the Dharma wheel and the lion. And Manjushri, or Manjughosha, another Aloka image, the Bodhisattva of wisdom, the active principle of wisdom, holding the book and holding the sword that cuts through all dualities. And there's another image, Manjushri, here shown riding the snow lion. And then we've had energy, we've had wisdom, and finally compassion. And this is image of the Western Buddha, Amitabha, who represents love and compassion. And Green Tara, the female, again a female Buddha, who represents active compassion. And in China, Kuan Yin, represents compassion, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Perhaps maybe as common as images of the Buddha in China to see these, and you'll see them even in non-devout Chinese people. They'll often have an image of Kuan Yin on a little shrine in their house or in their shop. And there's a modern image of Kuan Yin. Kuan Yin sometimes shown male, sometimes shown female, often shown like this in royal ease. And the whole mandala of 5 Buddhas, which deserves a whole slideshow of its own. So I might do that sometime in the future. And here's a mandala. I was on a retreat a few years ago at Pramaloka, and we tried to make a sand mandala showing the seed syllables and the Buddhas of the different directions. Sorry, green in the north, blue in the east, yellow in the south, red in the west. Okay, so in a way, I hope I've just given you a sense, but what I would like to suggest that you do is that when you encounter an image of the Buddha, you simply look at it and just see what effect it has. And artists are fallible creatures. Some of them will succeed better than others, and we will relate to some forms of art better than others. But if we just remember, this is attempting to depict awakening. It's attempting to depict wisdom and compassion and energy combined. It's trying to show you deep centeredness and poise. It's not really trying to depict the founder of Buddhism, but it may remind you of incidents in the Buddha's life or teachings of Buddhism by the gestures of the hands and the posture of the body, and who else is there in the image.